for a few more folks to arrive, I will go ahead and move forward. So today, I'd like to welcome everyone in to the April 2025 Bang Forum. And we've got a fantastic speaker with us today who's from Anthrotech, and she's going to be speaking on common misconceptions about digital accessibility. So I look forward to this presentation, and if you have questions along the way, please put them in the chat, and we'll see if Shruti will answer them for us when she gets a chance. So with that, I'll pass it over to Shruti.
Thank you, Talon. I'm just going to share my screen. And Talon, if it's okay, I can't really see the chat. So if there's any questions that come up or anything that I need to answer or address, could you just unmute and let me know?
Absolutely, I'd be happy to.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Thanks.
So welcome to Common Misconceptions about Digital Accessibility. My name is Shruti Vijaykumar, and I am a digital accessibility specialist at Anthrotech, and I am IAAP CPAC certified. A little bit about me at Anthrotech, I work on web accessibility audits, document remediation, research with people with disabilities, and I am particularly passionate about conducting trainings and education related to accessibility. And I'm also really passionate about social justice, and I think that equal access to or equitable access to information can lead to equal access to opportunities. And that's one of my main motivations for being in this field. My hope today for all of you is to learn a little bit more about accessibility through these misconceptions that I'll be sharing with you, and also to hopefully understand accessibility in a way where you can bring these concepts up or these points up in meetings or rooms where there's decisions being made about accessibility, and give you some tools to be able to contribute to those important discussions. A little bit about my company, Anthrotech. We are a human-centered design consultancy focused on government agencies, nonprofits, and enterprises with a social impact mission. And at Anthrotech, I've had the pleasure of working with some amazing champions of accessibility with several agencies in Washington State. So Department of Services for the Blind, Department of Licensing, Administrative Office of the Courts, just to name a few. And with that, let's start talking about misconceptions and why it's important to challenge misconceptions. We live in a world which is abundant with information, and with that abundance comes a lot of misunderstandings and misconceptions. And specifically when it comes to accessibility, these misconceptions can lead to decision making that can unintentionally end up harming people with disabilities more than helping them. And that's why it's important to understand some of these misconceptions. I'm going to jump right into the myths or misconceptions. Myth number one is accessibility only benefits people with disabilities. There seems to be this notion that there are two camps in the world, people with disabilities and people without disabilities, and it's two separate groups with no overlap. But the truth is that it's much more fluid than that. Disability is a natural part of the human experience, and it could happen to anyone at any stage in life. A disability could impact you or a loved one, and in fact, it will impact you or a loved one at some point. And I'd like to use this diagram by Microsoft to illustrate the different scenarios or types of disabilities that somebody could experience. So you could, there could be permanent, temporary, or situational disability. An example of permanent disability could be permanent blindness or a permanent motor disability because of, that somebody has by birth. A temporary disability could be a disability that happens because of maybe an accident and maybe for a period of time, you're not able to use your shoulder or arm. And situational disability could look like, for example, if you're just driving and it's a bright sunny day and the glare of the sun makes it difficult for you to see a few feet ahead of you or the road ahead of you, then that would be an example of situational disability. And you probably can relate to one or two of these examples. And designing for people with disabilities is designing for all of these different scenarios and situations and types of disabilities. And so that's why accessibility can really benefit everyone. There also sometimes seems to be this notion that, this people with disabilities are a small minority group, but the truth is that it's a massive, often overlooked audience. It is the largest minority group with 1.3 billion people with disabilities in the world, and a quarter of the population in the US, that is 61 million people, have disabilities. And also, their friends and families and allies are also more likely to support businesses and services that prioritize accessibility. So this is by no means a small group, and it's a huge group, and that's why accessibility is not a favor; it's a human right. This quote by Haben Girma is holds true, and I'll be giving you examples of this, which is disability is an opportunity for innovation. There have been so many designs in the world where it was initially designed for, those products or services were designed for people with disabilities, but it ends up benefiting everyone, and it's also popularly known as, universal design. The curb cut effect is a good example of this, which is the curb cuts that you see on, the sideway, the walkways, the sideways, were initially made for people to use wheelchairs comfortably, but it ended up benefiting so many more people. So people who use bicycles or, who want to drag maybe a heavy cart or a luggage, it just benefits so many different people. A few more examples of how accessibility is just good design and benefits everyone is, we would, as a part of accessibility, increase color contrast of different UI components. So it would be either buttons or text with the background would have high contrast for people who are low vision. And this accessibility best practice also improves visibility in the outdoors. So if you were outdoors and using your phone and there was, glare from a light source coming on your phone, you would still be able to read some text or buttons because of those components having high color contrast if they were made in an accessible way. Also, eliminating distractions or using plain language benefits people with cognitive disabilities to be able to navigate content and read content, but it also enhances engagement for all users. And creating responsive websites with touch friendly buttons and uh, links which are easy to click on can also help people who may not have motor disabilities, and it improves the mobile usability for all users. So no matter what device you use, whether it's a tablet or phone, you would be able to use that website comfortably because it's designed for people with motor disabilities. Now, those were examples in the real world with and some about devices and websites, but I'd also like to share an example of a form that we worked on with statewide HR. This was in Washington State, statewide HR. And we had this form, which had a lot of information all crammed in one page. And there was there were a lot of form fields that were laid out within tables, which is not ideal for screen reader users. And so when we received this form, we started to work on it and improve its accessibility. And we made sure that we, defined headings, improved the overall structure of the form, made sure that there are different sections. There's enough space to put input for users. Made sure that the fields have descriptive labels and the document has a descriptive title. All of these quick accessibility changes resulted in the form now looking like this, which is that one page crammed form has now turned into 3 or 4 pages of, and it's also been organized in sections so that it's easier to navigate, even for sighted users, to be able to navigate to different sections. And then we also see that each form field now has enough input space for the user to type in the answer that they want to. So all of these changes, of course, made this form accessible to blind users or screen reader users, and also made it accessible to and usable for everyone. Improving accessibility also improves usability, and this form was a good example of that. And another benefit that we may not realize is that when you improve usability in this way, you have fewer people calling, you know, admin or support teams asking how they can fill out a form. And so that'll also reduce the burden on those internal teams trying to help people fill out these forms that are important to them. So the fact is that accessibility benefits everyone. Myth number 2 is accessibility is the same as usability. So we talked about accessibility and usability a little bit, but I do want to have convey that distinction between both of these concepts, because the more we understand the unique, how they are unique, we would be able to use them together in a powerful way. So accessibility in many ways is doing the bare minimum, where you're removing barriers for people with disabilities so that they can access information. And usability, it goes one step beyond and works on ease of use and functionality of that product or service. So to understand this better, we can work on an exercise on making images more accessible, and understanding how we can make images also more usable for people with disabilities. So what is an alt text? An alt text is a description of an image that is read by screen readers to communicate the information in that image, which would benefit blind users. And so in this exercise, I would like to share a sample web page, and we can together discuss on what alt text would be the best alt text for this particular web page, and then choose from 3 options. And then we can discuss about which one would be the most accessible and usable. So this is the web page. It's the Department of Enterprise Services web page that I'm using as an example. And it has a menu on top and some links and buttons on the page. But the focus of this conversation will be on the image on the screen, which is just an image that's been added for aesthetic appeal. So it's this person sitting on a desk and signing a document. And One option for alt text would be to have an empty alt text, which means that we would skip this image entirely with a screen reader. And so the screen reader wouldn't even know that there is an image like this on the page and just skip right to the information. Alt text option 2 is a person holding a pen and signing a document on a desk. It's a short and sweet description of the image. And alt text 3 is slightly longer and detailed. It says a close up of a person in a yellow t shirt with their face out of frame. One hand flips a page while the other holds a pen, signing a document on a desk. So my question to you is, which alt text do you think is the more usable option? So is it option 1, option 2, or option 3? And I'll just wait for a minute or two for all of you to type in your answers, and then we'll discuss which one we think could be the most usable. And Talent here, if you don't mind, if you could just tell me what's happening in the chat because I can't see it right now.
Yep, I had just unmuted to do that.
Okay.
So it looks like we've got quite a few number 2 coming in, some number 3s, almost as many number 3s as number 2. And we also have a number 1 in there, a couple of number 1s.
Okay, awesome.
So a mix.
Yeah, it seems to be a mix, and that's usually the case. And I don't blame you. This is, it's not very straightforward to know what to do in this case, but uh, in this case, as an accessibility specialist following best practices, I would recommend that we skip the image entirely for screen reader users. And I will give you the reason for this. We could, in a website, especially in this scenario where there's a lot of information on this web page, and a user that's coming to the web page is looking for important information, and so we are trying to also eliminate as much noise as possible for screen reader users because there's already so many links and information to go through. And so when we look at this image and think about how meaningful it is, it's not really adding any meaningful information to the page. It's more for aesthetic appeal for sighted users to be able to get an idea of what this web page is about. And so that's why skipping this with the screen reader would be the most usable option. It allows screen reader users to completely skip anything aesthetic and go straight to the information that they need. But in other cases, if it was a meaningful image, then options 2 or 3 would be what we would go with. So yeah, thank you for participating in that tiny poll, but and I'm happy to answer questions about this after we after I share more points. So yeah, it's important to understand the balance between accessibility and usability. I'm sure all of you who chose option 2 or 3 it was a well-intentioned effort on making that image accessible. But we also have to think about how meaningful those images are and whether they would be adding value to the screen reader experience or not. And also thinking along the same lines about descriptive link text for your links. You could have well-intentioned descriptive link text for your links, which is great. But if we don't address the information architecture, or we don't address how many links we show on a page, for example, if there are 300 links on a page, then can users actually find what they're looking for, even if the links are descriptive? So those are questions that we should consider to make sure that accessibility and usability are going hand in hand for people with disabilities and for all users. And it's important to remember that efficiency is for everyone. We can, there's sometimes this notion that people with disabilities have superhuman capabilities in other, areas where, there's sometimes this this notion that people who are blind have really great hearing, and while that can be true for a few people with disabilities, that's not the case for a majority of people with disabilities. And so we have to keep in mind that the cognitive load and fatigue of using a screen reader is real for blind users or for any other assistive technology users, even if it's speech input or um, keyboard only users. We have to keep in mind that fatigue and cognitive load can really come in the way of accessing information. Fact is, accessibility doesn't always mean usability, and we have to think about them individually and together. Myth number 3: accessibility overlays make websites automatically accessible. So overlays are these software tools that live on top of websites, and they claim to automatically fix accessibility issues. It could be in the form of a widget or a plugin, and you could click on it and it opens up this option, a set of options with accessibility adjustments, or it could just automatically open up when the page loads. And they are seemingly fast and inexpensive solution, or at least they're sold as a seemingly fast and inexpensive solution. But the reality of overlays is the complete opposite. In fact, it's in many cases, some of the benefits that overlays have are redundant. So, for example, increasing the size of text or changing the color contrast. Those are some features available in overlays, but users or people with disabilities who need those kinds of filters already have free tools that they use to do that, and so it's a redundant benefit. And also, the screen readers in these overlays can interfere with assistive technology or screen readers that users may have. And when it interferes with their own assistive technology, they're forced to now shut down that software that they are used to using and use an overlay screen reader, which they may not be comfortable with. Overlay companies have also repeatedly made false claims about how their product makes the website WCAG or ADA compliant. And that's also false. It doesn't really change the source code in any way. It's just a band-aid solution for accessibility and doesn't end up helping people with disabilities. And they also don't protect you from lawsuits. In fact, they may even encourage one, because if you have an overlay on your website, that is kind of indicating that your website is not accessible. So it could actually encourage a lawsuit. There was a survey conducted by WebAIM, and this was a survey of accessibility practitioners and what they thought about overlay effectiveness. And an overwhelming majority, 70% of them, said that overlays are either not at all effective or not very effective. And a very small minority said that they are very effective, so 3%. And the verdict on overlays is very clear. There's also been a lack of trust among people with disabilities, because overlay companies have discredited their experiences when they came forward and said that overlays are not working for them. And because of this, they have gained a bad reputation in the community, and have also been, some websites have also been boycotted by people with disabilities because of this reason. Here's what some people with disabilities are saying on Twitter about overlays. I know with 100% certainty, any site which has deployed an overlay in the past year and a half has been less usable for both my wife and me, both blind. Every time I go on a website and I hear the accessibility notification that this site is adjusted to my screen reader, I know that my blocker isn't working properly and I'm in for a hellish experience on that particular website. So I do want to say that overlays are definitely bad for accessibility, but automation is not always bad. Automation is actually helpful in identifying issues, and some automated accessibility checkers are actually great tools for accessibility. So Axe DevTools, Google Lighthouse, Wave browser extension, all of these different tools are actually great for identifying accessibility issues. And the main difference between overlays and checkers is that overlays claim to fix issues, but checkers are identifying issues. And then you can use manual evaluation to make sure you're verifying those and then, fixing and implementing fixes that are actually usable for people with disabilities. So we want to encourage innovation and automation, but we also must recognize that when technology can do more harm than good. The fact is that overlays are bad and automated checkers are good. Myth number 4, you can outsource the responsibility of digital accessibility. So who is responsible for accessibility of your digital content? Is it the third party developers who were hired to create or maintain websites and documents? Or is it designers who are working on prototypes and mockups? Or is it accessibility specialists who are doing accessibility audits? Or is it your internal team? And the truth is that your organization and you are responsible for accessibility. If there are any lawsuits that are filed against your organization by people with disabilities, then your teams would be responsible in addressing that lawsuit. And so it's not going to be a third party or vendor that would be responsible for that lawsuit. Can you do? It's important to realize that you must share responsibility for organizational change. So you can work with vendors, but you must share the responsibility for it. Prioritizing accessibility is important, and adding accessibility as a requirement in your RFPs and choosing vendors carefully is also important. How can you choose vendors carefully, and what are some red flags that you should be looking out for? If they claim to make a website 100% accessible, that's a red flag because there are some limitations in the research we have on web accessibility today, and making superlative claims like that is usually a red flag. Using vague language to describe their process for accessibility is also um, something to think about because if they're not able to properly describe to you their process for accessibility and what tools they use and how they do it and how they would be able to bring you on board the process, then that should also be a red flag for you. And then finally, if they refuse to collaborate cross-functionally, uh, a really competent vendor would want to work with your teams and want to work with your leadership to make accessibility a part of the process. And so they should be able to collaborate with you cross functionally. Here's a reminder that people with disabilities are counting on you and your advocacy. This is a really powerful quote by a participant who's blind, and they participated in Anthrotech's document accessibility study, where they were going through a form, and it there were a lot of barriers in this form, And so this is what they had to say. This is exactly what happens to us when we can't fill out a form. And so when we then call for help, we are already rinsed up. We try to contain it, we try to manage it. But imagine that I have to do this at my doctor's office. I have to do this to buy groceries. I have to do this to pay a bill. I have to. And a person should be able to come to the face of government, and the government ought to be a textbook example of how someone can come to them and get equitable treatment. So I would encourage all of you to be champions of change. And I also want to acknowledge that some of you may already be working on advocacy and being champions of change in your teams. And I want to acknowledge that that work is important. It can have ripple effects, not just in your teams and your organization, but also your state and the country. And so you individually making an effort towards accessibility has long-term effects, and I hope all of you realize that. So the fact is we must share responsibility for the accessibility of your website and digital materials. Myth number 5: accessibility is too hard and too costly. Accessibility can be hard and costly if it is, a last minute effort, and it's not a sustainable practice within the organization. So integrating accessibility early to keep it manageable and cost effective is key to making sure that your products are accessible. Make sure that you're incorporating accessibility guidelines into every part of the product development, maintenance, and strategy. And also make sure that you're including the perspective of people with disabilities. So whether that's through research or including the voice of your co-workers with disabilities in important decision making rooms, or making sure that they have a voice at the table when these decisions are being made. And I want to give you an idea of how accessibility can be a part of every department in your organization, starting with development. So, using best practices for writing code, for example, writing code with using semantic HTML is not only going to make your websites more accessible, but it's also going to help your dev teams be more organized and collaborate better. Building accessible component libraries, so building buttons and links and having them be accessible, and reusing those kinds of accessible components can really help scale accessibility and not make it this huge task to complete, but it just becomes second nature because it's part of a component library. Using reliable automated tools can also be helpful. Automated tools can capture about 20 to 30% of issues. And it's important for development teams to use those to address them early on. And then we can supplement the rest of the issues that come up with a manual evaluation. And manual evaluation can help uncover those issues that automated tools cannot. And I'd like to give you an example of what an issue that is uncovered in a manual evaluation looks like. So I have an example of a keyboard trap. So keyboard users, usually people with motor disabilities, would, who are not comfortable or cannot use the mouse, would use navigate content. And as the in this video that I'm going to share with you, I would ask you to pay attention to how the focus shifts from one input field to another. And at one point, the keyboard focus, starts to create a loop, and it's not possible for the user to come out of this loop. and that's an accessibility barrier. Play the video now. So I hope you were able to catch that. The keyboard, the focus, it just started to go in that loop. And at this point, if somebody was a keyboard user, they would be stuck and not be able to come out of that. So that's an example of what you would uncover in a manual audit. Accessibility in research is an important way of including the voice of people with disabilities. So on the right hand side, there's an example of one of Anthrotech's researchers and my coworker Daniel. He was working on a research study related to public transport and working with people with uh, low vision and blindness. And it's important to incorporate the voices of people with disabilities in research and create personas that reflect their lived experience. So, what are some things that we don't consider about disability that impact their experience with a product or a service? And it could be cognitive load or chronic pain that impacts their experience. Also, what are some things that may not be related to their disability but still have to be considered? So for example, what are their wants and wishes outside of their disability? And creating a persona usually helps with incorporating their point of view. Prioritizing the most impacted user groups is also important. There's so much diversity within people with disabilities, so identifying which user groups would be most impacted by your service or product is important in making sure that we are going through research in an iterative and impactful way. Here's an example of a research insight. So this was a participant who's blind in a study about document accessibility at Anthrotech. And this particular participant had, was really struggling with navigating a form because of how complex it was. And so this is what they had to say. Time is everything. Time is money, right? And remember, these are my hands going through keystroke by keystroke by keystroke. So, yeah, if I can cut an hour out of each form because of its simplicity, I preserve my hands for other projects for the day. And that simple insight on how the fatigue of using the keyboard and how that impacts them physically is an example of a research insight. And we're proud to report that at Anthrotech, we had 885 people with disabilities who participated in our research studies in 2024. Accessibility can also be part of design. So design systems are a great way to insert accessibility because there are these repeatable, reusable components that designers work on. So whether it's buttons or whether it's typefaces and drop boxes, all of those things can be reused, and designing them in an accessible way can reduce the risk of introducing accessibility issues later on. Designers also make important choices. For example, if they choose interactive components, then just making sure that those components can be accessed using the keyboard and mouse and speech input. Considering that while making choices is important. Ensuring clear readability by making sure that the typefaces, font sizes, all contribute to a good reading experience for all users is also important. And then predicting outcomes. So, does a button look like a button? Are there visual cues for sighted users to be able to tell which components can be interacted with and which cannot? Um, those are also some choices that designers make. Accessibility can be a part of content strategy, where categorizing and grouping content can really go a long way in helping users find what they need. And providing clear, concise alt text for meaningful images can help screen reader users navigate content easily and efficiently. Plain language can minimize cognitive load and fatigue and chronic pain for people who have cognitive disabilities, but also everyone. And accessibility can also be part of business strategy. So developing a culture where accessibility is a priority is a must. So if there is an issue that comes up related to accessibility and it needs to be fixed, do teams receive pushback or are they able to work on those fixes? This is something that happens when we have a culture of accessibility. Accessibility can be a great way of communicating organizational maturity to your audiences and customers. It can also help you build a brand image and a reputation, which makes your customers uh, trust you, and it can also gain you loyalty. I want to share an example of how you could communicate maturity as an organization. And this is an accessibility statement on the website of Washington State's Office of Equity. And I really like the statement because it acknowledges the accessibility work that the Office of Equity has done and points out some of the gaps in accessibility that they're still working on, and then invites feedback from their customers on and users on if they can do anything to improve their accessibility, then they would like to hear about it. And I think that really communicates a lot of maturity as an organization to be able to put a statement like that out there and invite feedback from users. And this is just one statement from the one sentence from the statement that I'd like to share with you, which I think gives an idea of what you can expect here. And it says, learn how we prioritize accessibility tips, and let us know what changes could make our website more accessible. Accessibility can seem like a really difficult task, but it's important to remember that it's about progress over perfection. A quote that I love from one of my favorite accessibility advocates, Merrill Evans. And it is really about moving the needle and not about getting it perfect right from the beginning. It's about working towards that progress. Fact number 5 is accessibility isn't rocket science, it's about being intentional. So let's recap what we learned today. Accessibility benefits everyone. Accessibility doesn't always mean usability. Overlays are bad, automated checkers are good. And we must share responsibility for accessibility. And accessibility isn't rocket science, it's about intentionality. So I would encourage all of you to challenge your assumptions. The list I shared with you today is by no means an exhaustive list, but I would ask you to listen to the needs of the communities that you're serving, and follow people with disabilities on social media. There are a lot of vocal advocates, and they share a lot of insights about the experiences that people with disabilities have, and it's really educational. Also, include and value the voices of your coworkers who have disabilities. and make sure that they have a seat at the table when important decisions are being made. I'd like to end the session with this quote that says, when the data and the anecdotes disagree, the anecdotes are usually right. Thank you. And you can reach us at info@anthrotech.com. Any questions from the audience? I'll be happy to answer.
Thank you, Shruti. I have a quick question of how often should you train your team on like accessibility, and where can we get training like that? Where can government employees get training like that?
Yeah. So training, it's very important to consider the outcome of the training. So it's not just about learning accessibility best practices, but it's also about being able to apply those best practices in your day-to-day tasks. So I think it's important to consider where you are accessibility maturity wise in the organization, and if you have little to no, if your teams have little to no skills in accessibility, or there's like varied level of skills, then starting with a basics training, working on making sure that your teams are able to implement those learnings and apply them in their day-to-day tasks, and then iterating on that over those trainings with more advanced best practices would be the way to go. And where can you get a training like that? Anthrotech offers trainings on accessibility. We do so. Some of the trainings that we offer are document accessibility training, covering different file formats and forms, and uh, more advanced level document accessibility trainings as well. We also have a foundations training. So why you should care about accessibility, the impact of it on people with disabilities. And then we also have a training for um, development teams on what best practices they should be using to make sure that accessibility is a part of their process. And we also have a plain language training. So writing for the web is one of the trainings we offer. But yeah, I would say make use all of the materials that are out there, that are free to use, and also make sure that you're focusing on where your teams lie. So what are some pain points and challenges that are unique to your teams, and then working with a partner uh, to make sure that we're addressing those specific issues so that your teams are able to apply what they learn in trainings.
So thank you, Shruti, for that. I work or I manage folks that are largely leading IT projects. Where's the best place to start by building accessibility into an IT project? I know in the planning phase, but what does that look like? Who could we talk to even?
Yeah. So I think one of the the usually the inertia for starting with accessibility is we don't have an idea of, this is something I've heard from teams, and it's we don't have an idea of where we are at the moment, how accessible our content is. We don't so what we've found useful in the past is to start by creating an inventory, a list of all of the digital materials that you have. So whether it's different websites, different documents, and or videos, whatever those types of different content are, making sure that you have a list, and you're prioritizing them based on which digital content is most used by your communities, the users. And then after creating that is when you can start to do audits manual audits, which would allow you to get a sense of where you lie accessibility wise in each of those digital materials that you've prioritized. So I think it's very important to get a grip of or get an idea of what are all those materials and then start from there. Um, yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Absolutely, that helps a lot. Are there any other questions for Sruti? Hearing no other questions, I want to thank you so much for sharing with us today, and the content you've provided is absolutely invaluable. So I look forward to hearing from Anthrotech again in the future, and I appreciate your time.
Yeah, it was a pleasure being here and presenting. Thank you.